Faye. Great to be here today. Good to see you all. In fact, just on that, before we get going, this session is all about focus, productivity. I'm going to ask if at all possible, and if you're up for it, can everyone just turn their cameras on? You can obviously keep yourself muted. The reason I'm asking you to do this is if you turn your cameras on, it's just going to slightly up your levels of focus, going to make you feel like you're in the room. Oh, there you go. You know what? It's just nice to see a face as well. Look at this. This is good. Brilliant. Okay, that's nice. So we have 30 minutes together, and I actually have quite a lot to share with you in these 30 minutes. I am Scottish, so I might talk a little bit fast, so I'll be aware of that. Specifically, I've got 5 productivity and focus hacks for remote working. Now, I say remote working. These are going to work for you whether you're at home right now, whether you're in a coffee shop or you're in the workplace. They work right across the board, but particularly for remote working, you're going to find them valuable. Before we get started, let me just throw out a question to you all. Think about your own levels of focus, your own levels of productivity, maybe just over the last week or so. How would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? So imagine 10 is you really feel like you're in the zone, you're not feeling time pressured, you feel like you're creating a lot of impact. 1, well, it's the other thing. In the chat, pop your number in there now. Let's see what we have. Okay, now I will say that when I ask this question to a group of people, what I tend to see is something similar to what I'm observing right now. Most people will scale themselves somewhere between 4 and a 7. Sometimes a few down the other end, sometimes a few people up the top. I also just like to know I'm in the right place. So this is good. The scores are good. I would say before we get going, Sophie's done a bit of an introduction for me there, which is fantastic. I've got a very eclectic background, very, very eclectic. I was actually a professional actor for the first 15 years of my career from 1990 to the mid 2000s. And during that time, I also wrote a game show for the BBC. It was called Monkhouse's Memory Masters. Anyone remember that? I always ask, no one ever does. The irony doesn't pass me by. But that kind of threw me into a crazy world of memory improvement. I ended up competing in the World Memory Championships and all sorts of other stuff. But I basically spent 15 years working, well, actually 25 years working memory, focus, productivity, 15 years as an actor. I spent 10 years leading digital products for like a BBC, Microsoft, Telegraph. And now I run a coaching business. There's lots of other things being an actor that I did in my younger life. My primary focus, though, over the last 25 years has really been in 4 key areas. The first one is focus, mainly because when I was young, I had a reputation for having the worst memory. Like I truly believed I could not remember things. What I actually discovered later on is it was much more to do with my ability to focus. And once I started to get my head around that, I was able to ease off and not beat myself up about my memory. And actually it started to perform better. And then I learned a bunch of techniques and then I got pretty good. So focus is one, memory is the other, productivity is a third area, and habit design, which we'll touch at the end, is the fourth area that I focus on. Today, we're really going to dive into some hacks around focus and productivity. Now, the thing is, when it comes to this area, there are some key challenges that show up for us as humans, particularly over the last year. And I'll just bring up my slide deck up here because I'm going to start to bring some of this to life. So one of the first key areas, well, one of the biggest challenges is as humans, we're just not very good at multitasking, or more specifically, task switching is very, very inefficient. We're not very good at it. And so there's a bit of research here that was done by the Stanford Memory Lab. They basically took 10 years worth of data. And what they discovered, I guess no real surprises, is that if you are a heavy multitasker, then you're going to underperform light multitaskers when it comes to anything with sustained attention. So your ability to focus. Now, think about how you currently operate today. Are you heavy or are you light? If you're a heavy multitasker, most likely you've got about 15 browser tabs open. Your WhatsApp is digging on your phone, your emails in the background, maybe even there's a telly on there. Now, if you work from home, I've got 3 boys, kids are up, well, they're at school, I've got one of them upstairs. There's all this stuff going around. We're not very good at multitasking. So, second challenge is we've been living through a pandemic. And so levels of anxiety, levels of stress, there's going to be different for everyone depending on your circumstances, but they're going to be heightened. And when our levels of stress are heightened, prefrontal cortex, that bit at the front of your brain, weakens. Primitive brain kicks in. Now, this is a problem because this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, deals with that higher thinking, working memory, i.e., your ability to focus. And so if that's going to happen, it's a natural for us to be more unfocused. I found that stat last year, how to get your brain to focus went up by 300% at the beginning of COVID. There's a third challenge. We're designed to be distracted. It's how we're made up. In 2018, there was research that looked at humans and macaque monkeys. And what they discovered is that we actually go in and out of focus up to 4 times per second. Now, this is valuable for our survival. You're driving along in your car, someone steps on the road, boom, you're aware. Our brain is always checking. What's really happening is it's checking to see, is there something more important I should be paying attention to? Not so useful when you're working on your project, WhatsApp, oh, what is it? Oh, it's a picture, okay. And then you come back, not so good. So in a world where we're constantly distracted, how do we maintain or even increase our levels of focus? So let's jump into hack number 1. And it's a technique called priming. You may have heard of this. And what we're really trying to deal with here is there's just too much information for a brain to deal with. So we need to create some kind of filter. Now, if you don't prime yourself, you will be primed. And the definition of priming is that exposure to a stimulus influences the response to another stimulus. What does that mean? Well, think about it like this. Think about it last time where you bought an item, let's say a jacket, a coat, or it could be something really significant like a car. I remember when I bought my Citroen a number of years ago, I bought Citroen and it was a red Citroen. And have you noticed that when you buy something, then sometimes you start to notice other people have that same thing? Just give me a nod. Has that ever happened? It's happened to us all, right? At some point or other. It's because our brain is primed. You've essentially given your brain a signal that says, hey, this thing is important. You want to be interested, you want to look out for it, and you're going to pay attention. When I bought my Citroen, I actually noticed the same day that someone across the road, my neighbor, had exactly the same car. Lived here for years, never noticed it. So my brain wasn't important. It became important. The thing about priming is it can affect what you pay attention to, what you remember, and therefore the decisions that you make. Think about the last year. We have been primed. What's the one thing we've all been primed to do? In fact, we've been primed to do many things. I'm just going to bring my chat up here. In the chat, just ping me in the chat. What have we been primed to do? Right at the beginning of COVID, what were we all asked to do? What were all the things? Let me have a look. What we got here? Wash your hands, wear a mask, 2-meter social distance, isolate. There's all these things, particularly one of these things. We all washed our hands, right? But we started washing our hands after everything. We'd go out, we'd wash our hands. The shopping would come in, we'd wash the shopping, we'd wash our hands, we'd washing everything. We're primed, we're primed. So let's try this out. What I'm going to show you is on the next slide, there's a word, there's a 4-letter word. There's 1 letter missing. Where you are, out loud, say the first word that comes into your mind when you see the slide. See if this works. Who knows? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Okay, are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. What's the word? Say it out loud for yourself. Now that word, pop it into the chat. Pop that word into the chat. Soap, 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 soap. Okay. Soup. Someone's hungry. Okay. Oh, we've got more soups than I'd probably imagine. So what tends to happen here, and look, I haven't primed very elegantly. That was like a sledgehammer. I've been primed. Most people here, I imagine, and I see this lots, will say soap. Because if we look at what's going on here, I talk about COVID, talk about washing your hands, a picture of muddy hands. So then your brain's going, soap, I need to wash my hands. When I do this with a crusty bit of bread, by the way, with a baguette and it's melting butter and steam and a bowl, most people will say soup on this one. So it'll switch around. Let's try this. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second. I wouldn't mind a volunteer. Just stick your hand up. Who would like to help me out here? People I can see in my camera. Um, Taj, fantastic. Thank you. I saw you first. Would you mind unmuting for me? Can you hear me? Maybe someone has to unmute.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can. Thank you for this. Thanks for helping out. Okay, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Everyone else, play along with this. Taj, look around your room.
Okay.
And you have 10 seconds. Yeah. Just notice, don't try and remember. Notice anything which is square or rectangle. 10 seconds, off you go now. Everyone else try this as well. 10 seconds.
Okay. Yeah.
Is that it? Keep on going, keep on going. I mean, it's your rooms, you probably know it quite well.
Yeah, in theory, there's a lot of pressure now.
Don't try and remember. Okay, that's fantastic, Taj. Close your eyes for me.
Okay.
Okay, with your eyes closed, tell me everything you can remember, which is circle or oval.
An egg decoration thing.
Yeah.
Oh God. Circle
you see
oval.
The pause. Yeah. Okay, now keep your eyes closed. Now tell me everything you can remember, which is square or rectangle.
TV, door, laptop, board, folders, paper.
Okay, there's a list. Okay, now open your eyes and look around the room. What else can you see, which is circle or oval?
This. That's a good question. Oh, the pots.
Okay.
They've got like the flower pots.
Anything else? There's usually more than this.
Yes, there usually is.
So what we're starting to see here.
Medals.
Okay, so when you're primed, and I primed you with a simple question. What you pay attention to is actually what you remember. You don't even need to try and remember. And the other stuff can get omitted. Now, when you do this in a place where you're unfamiliar with, it's very, very significant. So thank you, Taj. Really appreciate you helping me out there. So how can we use this? How is this useful to us? Well, if you want to prime your brain, essentially filter through the noise, you want to get really good at asking good priming questions. For example, you're about to go into a meeting. You ask a question along these lines. I like to ask, what's interesting about X? If you're interested, your brain's going to pay attention. What's interesting about this meeting? What could be interesting about this meeting? What's interesting about this article or document I'm about to read? What's interesting about this person I'm about to meet? You will observe in more detail. Your brain will start to look out for this. So if you want to take more control over what you pay attention to, then get into this habit. A great way to get started this is to start your day with some primer questions. After you finish your breakfast, maybe you ask yourself, okay, what could be interesting about today? Or what do I want to achieve today? Or what am I grateful about? Maybe you ask some of those questions anyway. These things are priming your brain to pay attention. Hack number 2. I call this name it and reframe it. And it's really about becoming more aware, not ignoring, but becoming more aware of some of that negative chatter that goes on in our minds and creating some space for us to think and then maybe moving us forward. Back in 2007, there was research with 101 stock investors. And what they asked them to do over 20 days was just note down how they felt when they were making investment decisions, but also when it went wrong, when things weren't working out. And what they discovered is that those investors who were better able to regulate their emotion did 2 things. The first thing is that they just acknowledged how they felt. And the second thing, and this is the real key, they were very, very specific. So rather than just saying, oh, I'm furious that didn't work, or I'm really angry, they would go, actually, I'm frustrated. And they'd start to really understand where they were. Now, as soon as they did this, they started to understand what was happening. They weren't trying to beat themselves up. They weren't trying to push things away. They were just acknowledging. And so this gave them some space to think. Now, our brain, super interesting, obviously. Once you start to give yourself that space, you can look at how do you reframe it. Now, interestingly, a left brain hemisphere has a preference for optimism, and a right brain hemisphere has a preference for pessimism, both hugely valuable to us. If you're pessimistic, you understand risk, challenge, the problems. The real challenge with optimism is if you live here, then increase cortisol levels and you can become more anxious and stressed. So it's not a place you want to live, but you do want to use it when you need it. If you're optimistic, you become more solution focused. You release dopamine. You're going to be more motivated, interested. And this is a useful place to be when you're solving problems. However, you don't want to go too far down the optimistic road because that's where delusion lives. And so you really want a nice balance in your life. So once you've named how you feel, especially if you've experienced some kind of loss or you're feeling anxious about something, maybe you say, look, I'm working from home, I'm frustrated, too many distractions, there's too much going on. I'm not feeling good about it. If you were to lead with this question for yourself, how can I become more productive? How might your brain answer? It might go, I don't think you're listening. I don't want to be productive. I just told you I'm frustrated. And so you really want to gently ease in to how you start to shift how you think. It's like someone walking up to you and you're getting a coffee and you go, oh, I'm really frustrated. I feel like I've got too much going on. And they just go, hey, why don't you just be more productive? Or what can you do? You're like, you're not listening. And so lead into it gently. You want to seek to understand first, as Covey would say. So where is my frustration coming from? Like that's a gentler way of going, okay, well, maybe it's not to do with distracted by the kids. Maybe it's something else. Now, once you understand that, now you can open the door to asking more optimistic, solution focused questions. But this is a good way just to reframe how you're thinking. I told you there was quite a lot we're going to do today. Hack number 3. Okay, just a show of hands. Procrastination, a challenge for anyone? Anyone have that? Show up for them? Okay. We all do, right? We're humans. This is one of the things. So, what is procrastination? So, you've got something that you know you should do. Maybe there's this project. However, there might be lots of other things that you know you have to do. And so, with procrastination, this thing has some kind of pain associated with it. And I don't know about you, but what I tend to see with a lot of people I work with, it's the inertia. It's the getting started that is the hardest part. Once you're into something, it gets a little bit easier, right? And so with procrastination, rather than do this thing that's more painful, you choose things which are a little less painful, or maybe get a little bit more pleasure. So maybe you do email, or maybe you do a little bit of admin, and it's not shifting this thing. And so in order to overcome that, you need an easy way to get started. Barbara Oakley, you may have heard of her. She coined this term, diffuse thinking. And the idea is that as humans, we have 2 thinking modes. We have focused thinking. So think of that prefrontal cortex that we talked about, your working memory, you're in that kind of deep focused state. And then you have this other state, diffuse thinking. I remember calling this active daydreaming in one of my first books. And it's that place where, you know, when you go for a walk in the park and maybe an idea pops in your head, or you're in the shower and there's been a problem that's been going around your head, and suddenly you get the answer. Have you ever had that happen? So that's diffuse thinking. It's where your brain has space to think. Now, a great strategy that employs both of these thinking modes is the Pomodoro Technique. I imagine a lot of you here may have heard of this. It's been around since the 80s, Francesco Cirillo. Now, if you haven't heard of it, the principle is pretty simple. You do 25 minutes of focused thinking, and then you have 5 minutes of diffuse thinking, where you give yourself space to think. There's a challenge, and this is more an observation that I've seen. When people try to adopt this, it's not easy. They procrastinate, ironically, right? You end up procrastinating and you go, I won't do the Pomodoro, you do some admin instead. It just feels too hard. And so here are my 5 tips for making the Pomodoro work for you. First of all, you want to gamify the experience. And I say gamify, it's really simple. I usually suggest at the beginning of the day, get a number of post-it notes equivalent to the number of Pomodoros, so 30-minute chunks, that you believe you can carve out of your day, in between meetings, in between everything else you've got to do. And maybe that's 2, maybe it's 3. Be realistic. Now, once you do this, okay, now you've got a target. Now your brain is starting to get primed. The hard thing is to start the Pomodoro. So we make it easy. You don't think about what you're going to do. You literally get a timer. Here's my watch, and you go, boom, start the timer. That's it. You're on the roller coaster. You can't get off now. Now you can ask yourself, okay, what am I going to do? What do I do in the next 25 minutes? Okay, the next 25 minutes, I'm just going to write the skeleton of this deck. That's all I'm going to do. Great. Now you're focused. Now your interest is raised. Now you're primed. Now you can think for 25 minutes. Ideally, turn off your distractions, your WhatsApp, the email. At the end of this, and this is where your discipline comes in, and it takes practice, 25 minutes, stop. I like to have a little alarm go off on the phone with a round of applause. Hey, it just makes me laugh. It makes me giggle. It breaks the pattern. I can then take 5 minutes, step outside, go get a coffee, do whatever. Rinse and repeat. 3, take a longer break. Nice and simple, but you get started by starting the timer. Hack number 4. We're moving along. We're flowing along. So anyone here ever feel that the mind wanders a lot? That maybe you got some kind of brain fog. There's not a lot of clarity there. So with that in mind, think about the state of flow. You know, when you really feel like you're in it, sometimes happens in sports, when you're reading a book, when you're doing a project. How would you describe that? Just in the chat for me right now, how would you describe that state of flow? Just a few words. What does it feel like to you? Just pop that in the chat. What does that state of flow feel like to you? Think about an activity when you really feel that you're in it. How would you describe it? Pop that into the chat for me. There we go. No sense of time, fully in the moment, effortless, energy, completely engaged. We all know what this feels like because we have all experienced it. Satisfying engagement. Love it. Okay. So Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, he's known as the godfather of flow, over a period of time, over the years of his work, these are the kind of things that people said about flow. And you can recognize it in what you're saying here. You can think of this as a blueprint. Now, what I find interesting is if you make the Pomodoro work from you, it can be a good way to trigger yourself getting into that state because you've got clarity about what it is that you want. You will become unaware of time. What the bit that I love is that the motivation levels increase because of the act itself. The second thing that you can do in order to get yourself into that state of flow, and there's so much research around this, is some kind of meditation or mindfulness practice, particularly on mindfulness, lots of research on all these different areas here. I've been meditating probably since I was 14, 15, but I came into contact with mindfulness back in 2013. Michael Razek was doing, at the University of California, was doing research with a number of students, and he put half of them on a nutrition course, half of them on a mindfulness course. And the results were that the ones that went on the mindfulness course saw a reduction in mind wandering, increased improvements in work and memory and focus. So the real question isn't so much can I or how, should I have some type of mindfulness or meditation practice. It's more, how can I make it happen? How can I introduce it into my life? And for those of you who do meditate or do mindfulness, this will be familiar. An easy way in is called a 3-minute breathing space. It doesn't even have to take 3 minutes. And you might want to write this down for yourself just so you've got it. 3 steps. Step 1, you become aware of what's going on in your mind and your body. Now, you don't try and change anything. That's the key. I'm feeling a little bit anxious. Great. Don't change it. Just become aware. Step 2, you then focus just on one thing. In this case, it's the breath. This will really teach you the art of single focusing. Now, your mind will wander. Things will pop into your head. Don't beat yourself up. Just acknowledge that it happened. Guide yourself back to the breath. And the third thing you want to do is take that awareness that will have built up around your breath and let that come back into the body, come back into the moment. It's a great thing to do, particularly 2-3 p.m. in the afternoon when you want to get back in the zone. Do this daily, you're going to notice the impact over time. Hack 5 is the last one, tiny habits. So look, there's been 4 hacks so far. We've had priming, we've had name it and reframe it, the Pomodoro Technique, and build a mindfulness practice. It's easy to understand all of this. It's much harder to put it into practice. Tiny habits is a method created by a behavior scientist out of Stanford called BJ Fogg. And I ended up training in this method many, many years ago. And the promise is you can create new behaviors without willpower and motivation. And here's how it works. There's 3 steps. And it follows really an ABC approach. A, you pick an anchor. This is a habit that already exists in your life. Get out of bed, brush your teeth, go to the bathroom, leave the house, etc. Step 2, you create a very tiny version of your behavior you want to create. So let's say, that popped in my head, you want to do lots of push-ups. Start with 1. Or you want to floss your teeth. Start with 1 tooth. Don't start with all of them. Start with 1. And then the 3rd step, C, is you celebrate. This is going to create emotion. Now, what you'll find is you put these 3 things together, not only can you create a new habit, make it automatic in a number of days, it's then easier to grow that habit. And you don't need to pump yourself up to do it. Now, if you're interested in tiny habits, rather than talking about it, what I've popped into the digital goodie bag is a 5-day free course. Starts on Sunday. You'll get video content from BJ. I'll coach you personally next week, and it takes less than 3 minutes a day. So if you want to put some of this stuff into practice and you want a little help in hand, feel free to jump onto that. And last thing, just before we finish up, I'm just going to ask for maybe one more volunteer. I might just pick someone out that I can see. Who can I see? Gemma, I can see you. Do you mind helping me out? No? Not yet? Yet. Excellent. Okay, everyone else play along with this. Gemma, imagine what I say to you in your mind. So it still sound odd, but go with me here. On your feet, imagine your feet are covered in mud. Loads of mud in between your toes and your feet. Imagine in between your knees, there is a picture frame and you're holding it in between your knees. Can you see that? Great. Imagine on your thighs, there's a tomato. It's a Pomodoro tomato. You see where I'm going with this. Okay, you got tomatoes bouncing up and down your thighs. Imagine wrapped around your waist are lots of tiny little people meditating. They're, being quite mindful. And then finally on your chest, there are little plants growing out of your chest. Such a weird image. Okay, Gemma, what is on your feet?
Mud.
What's in your knees?
A picture frame.
What's in your thighs?
Tomatoes, Pomodoro ones.
What's on around your waist?
Lots of little people meditating.
Yes, and what's on your chest?
Lots of plants going out.
Well done, well done. So obviously what you can see we've done there is you've memorized the 5 hacks. You got priming, which was the mud. Remember, we had muddy hands, ask a good question. You've got name it and reframe it. That's on your knees. Pomodoro technique in your thighs. Meditating around your waist. Tiny habits on your chest. Last thing to say, if you're interested in developing that technique, in the digital goodie bag, I popped in a free course for you. It's all about memory, but it's really good for your focus. There you go. I hope you've all enjoyed that. I hope that's been a nice little lunchtime break. It's not a break. There's just so much gone out there. Hope you've enjoyed it. And yeah, any questions, feel free to track me down on LinkedIn website and I'll jump into that. There you go.
Mark, that's been awesome. Thank you so much. So we have actually popped some of the details into the chat, but they will also be going out into the digital goodie bag, which will go out